Good evening, everyone. It's fantastic to have you here with us this evening. My name is Minty Ledger and I'm the Interim Executive Director of Cambridge University Health Partners. I'd like to welcome you to this first event in the Cambridge Biomedical Campus on Virtual Tour series. In previous years, we have brought the best clinicians, academics and researchers to a variety of bars across Cambridge to let them explain their work, the challenges they face and their thoughts on what the future of healthcare might look like. However, since our last event in early March, things have changed a great deal for all of us. So we are taking our On Tour series online to become a series of webinars instead. We start tonight with a focus on the Cambridge Heart and Lung Research Institute, which is rapidly rising from the ground right in front of Royal Papworth Hospital. It is an honour for me to introduce our two speakers. The first is Professor Nick Morrell, who is the inaugural director of the Cambridge Heart and Lung Research Institute, or HLRI. He holds the British Heart Foundation Chair of Cardiopulmonary Medicine at the University of Cambridge and leads the Cardiovascular and Respiratory Theme of the Cambridge NIHR Biomedical Research Centre. Nick is a respiratory physician and contributes to the clinical service at both Addenbrooke and Royal Papworth Hospitals. At Royal Papworth, he is also the Research Director of the Pulmonary Vascular Diseases Unit. Following Nick, you will hear from Dr. Ian Smith, a chest physician specialising in ventilatory failure and sleep medicine, with expertise in weaning, domiciliary ventilation, sleep apnea, and non-respiratory sleep disorders, including narcolepsy and parasomnias. Ian is the Director of Royal Papworth Hospital's Respiratory Support and Sleep Centre, the first accredited by the European and British Sleep Societies. He also leads the Research and Development Directorate and oversaw the establishment of the Royal Papworth Clinical Trials Unit. During the two presentations, you can ask questions at any time using the Q&A box. These will then be addressed at the end of the talks by Nick and Ian. To reassure you all, you won't be seen or heard during the event, but it will be recorded and made available on our website afterwards, and we'll also send you a link to the recording. Many thanks indeed to Nick and Ian for their time this evening. I'd also like to thank Jill Wilson, our events manager, and Tony Taylorson, our comms manager, who've both worked extremely hard to bring the event to you tonight. So with no further ado, we'll start the evening with a short time-lapse video of the construction of the HLRI before Nick begins his talk. I hope you all enjoy the presentations and I look forward to introducing you to further topics. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. My name's Professor Nick Morrell, and I'm the inaugural director of the Cambridge Heart and Lung Research Institute. And it's a great pleasure this evening to tell you a bit about our progress with the building and also to tell you a bit more about its intended purpose. I'm going to start with this aerial view of the campus as it should appear in the next 2 or 3 years. Most of the buildings shown on here are already in existence, and some to the south of the picture form part of an exciting bioincubator space that is still work in progress. But you will see that the new Heart and Lung Research Institute sits very close to the centre of the campus, right next door to the Royal Papworth Hospital, just to the south of the AstraZeneca building. You might know that the plans for relocation of Papworth Hospital to this campus have been around for many, many years. And since the inception of this idea of moving the hospital, one of the main drivers was for a closer interaction with Addenbrooke, of course, but also with the university in terms of enhancing our capabilities of undertaking cutting-edge research in patients with heart and lung disease, so that we can improve outcomes for those patients through research. And this is an artist's impression of what things should look like in another year or so. You've got the Royal Papworth Hospital to the right of this picture, along with its famous duck pond, which moved with it from its old site at Papworth Everard. And I believe some of the ducks have also come along with it. But to the left of the picture there, you can see the Heart and Lung Institute, as it will appear, clad in this sort of bronze cladding. It's architecturally a very stylish building, I think, and indeed it was originally conceived by the architects based on the appearances of what a heart and lung look like. And if you squint, you might be able to see that. Through the gap between the institute and the hospital, again, you can see AstraZeneca's R&D headquarters, showing you the proximity for interaction with pharma, which is an important part of what we will be doing. So what are the key objectives of the institute? I've underlined the key words here. We want to create an international centre of excellence studying heart and lung disease and focusing on the big challenges that face us as a population. Now, for example, this could be, and indeed is, ischemic heart disease, coronary artery disease forms a large part of what we work on. Other common and challenging respiratory diseases, for example, COPD and lung fibrosis. And a real challenge, of course, recently has been the global pandemic and COVID-19. And one of the areas we're going to really focus on in the Institute is discovering new ways to treat the lung injury that is seen in patients with COVID-19, as well as patients with other conditions that lead to lung injury. So this is going to be a real focus for us going forwards. We want to be responsive to these sorts of challenges in the future. We also want to hasten and integrate discovery of translational sciences. In other words, science that is relevant to human disease by interdisciplinary interactions. So we want data scientists working with biological scientists, working with clinicians to speed up this process through integration. We want to be entrepreneurial, and by that I mean we all recognize that to really make a difference and to bring drugs to patients does require interaction with pharma and the biotech industry. And we want to maximize this interaction so that we can be as effective as possible in bringing new treatments to patients. We also think it's important that we train the next generation of scientists working on heart and lung disease to equip them with the very latest techniques to allow them to address the sorts of grand challenges that I was talking about earlier. And on the right side there are just a couple of shots of what the laboratories will look like at the top, and one of our seminar rooms down there at the bottom. I mentioned at the beginning that the Institute is located right next door to Papworth Hospital, and this was conceived as being very important right from the beginning of this project. Why would we want to do that? Well, clearly the proximity to the hospital allows increased opportunities for research and clinical collaboration. And for the scientists working in the institute, increased access to relevant patient populations, for example, for blood samples or tissues taken at the time of operations, working with patients to try and develop new drugs and treatments. We also wanted an opportunity to bring people outside of traditional biological sciences, for example, for, people in physics, engineering, maths and chemistry, to work with clinical researchers through the conduit provided by the Institute. And we've now developed a joined up strategy to tackle heart and lung disease between the university and Royal Papworth. We wanted to increase the quantity and quality of investigator-driven clinical research. So this is improving and making sure that people are trained to allow them to undertake, for example, clinical trials, and early stage clinical trials, investigating new drugs and new approaches in patients. We wanted to more rapidly deliver the results of our studies through experimental medicine and translational research. So, for example, experimental medicine might be where you think that a drug might be effective in a certain disease, but you want to test it in the quickest and most efficient way possible. So rather than doing a large, expensive clinical trial initially, you will use some other surrogate marker of disease and test it in the relevant patient populations to try and get proof of concept that the approach is likely to work at a larger scale. And at the core of what we do is training and education and creating an outstanding environment for that to occur. Now, in terms of the bricks and mortar, the main components of the building are as follows: that we will have plenty of new laboratory space in order to undertake the research and the science. We will also have room for new recruitment. Importantly, this isn't just about moving people around. This is about bringing people together, but also recruiting new excellent people from across the world to join us. We're very proud of our clinical research facility, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. But the unique capability of the clinical research facility is that we will be able to study patients and be able to explore the use of new drugs in relevant patient populations. This may be the first time they've been used in that patient population, and we hope to do that in a very safe environment in a facility which is staffed by doctors and nurses with the relevant skills to look after these patients. And this is something that the pharmaceutical industry have told us is a real roadblock for them developing new drugs, to access relevant patient populations in a safe environment, to undertake these very early studies where a drug might be going into a patient for the first time. The building also comprises some core facilities to provide the scientific infrastructure for the researchers that are in there. For example, advanced microscopy with the latest microscopes that are capable of imaging cells at very high resolution. Collaboration space is essential, and we have a very high proportion of spaces within the institute which will allow people to get up from their desks, go and sit with a coffee, talk to a colleague, discuss ideas, and come up with new proposals. And again, education being at the heart of the institute, we provided a new seminar lecture theatre space for the scientists and the clinicians. So we can now take a closer look at the interior of the building. This is on the ground floor, and you can see that the building is essentially split into two curved halves, one of which is on the west wing towards the motorway and the east wing towards Papworth Hospital. And in the east wing on the ground floor, it's mainly seminar room and teaching space that we see here. Whereas on the west wing, On the ground floor, the southerly part of the building is mainly given over to plant, so space that's required to make the building actually work. But the northern part of the West Wing is given over to our clinical research facility, where we will have 10 inpatient beds there to be able to undertake studies with the relevant patient populations. And within that clinical research facility, we also have rooms where we can undertake testing, for example, lung function testing, echocardiography, looking at heart function, and exercise testing. So the studies can be done which use those kind of readouts to when they're testing new drugs, for example. And we can also see people on a day patient basis in some consulting rooms there. So moving on now to the first floor. This is the first floor, and I'm not going to show you a picture of the second floor because it's essentially the same sort of pattern. And here on the east wing on the first floor, we have room for the Research and Development Office from Papworth Hospital, but also mixed in there are university scientists, data scientists involved in population science and quantitative sciences and genetics and genomics. Whereas on the west wing, we have research laboratories with tissue culture facilities, for example, using stem cells, and these core laboratories that I mentioned, which provide infrastructure to the scientists within the institute, like microscopes and so on. Excitingly, we also have an organ perfusion laboratory where researchers from Papworth Hospital can investigate new ways of preserving function of hearts and lungs intended for transplantation, so that we can increase the number of hearts and lungs that are available for transplantation by preserving their function for longer, which is an exciting piece of work and an example of research between both the university and the hospital. So I'm just showing you a few artist impressions now of what the polished interior of the building will look like when it opens. This is the main reception which is at the south of the building. You can see the reception area there. The colour palette is very natural. It's sort of wood and green and greys and so on. And you can also see here in the entrance another collaboration space where visitors can sit and chat to scientists and clinicians about research and come up with new ideas. And similarly, on the second floor, you again can see these two individuals here are discussing research ideas, hopefully hatching new ways of treating patients. And you will also notice that there is a big hole in the floor on the second floor. That's intentional. This provides a lovely atrium, sort of light to get down into the building from the second to the first floor, and really sort of creates this sense of openness and collaboration between researchers within the building. On the left side of this image, you can see these desks here, which are the sort of write-up areas for scientists who work in the laboratories, so they can come out and record their data and results and analyze it. And in the furthest part of the image over here in the background, you can see where the data scientists are. And all this is connected. So the data scientists will easily come and chat to and meet with the laboratory scientists and vice versa. So this is a real opportunity for integration of new ideas. So in terms of the sorts of research that we intend to do within the Institute, because after all, the Institute itself is bricks and mortar, but what's important is what goes on inside it. This is an illustration of how we intend to do business. So Cambridge is very famous for its great discovery works around genetics and genomics, for example. So an awful lot of information is available to us. But in order to move this forwards to help patients and come up with new ideas for drug discovery, we have to be able to prioritize those outputs. And there are various ways of doing that, which can take place within the Institute. Once you've come up with a priority list of importance, you need to be able to then go back to patient groups and validate whether a particular research finding really is important in a disease setting. Again, that can be done in patient cohorts, either from Papworth Hospital or from other resources. And then ultimately, when you have a molecule or an idea or an approach, you can then test that in relevant patient populations within the clinical research facility of the Institute, potentially working with ideas from local pharma and the biotech industry. So through this process, this virtual circle, we hope to be able to take much more rapidly the discovery information through to research that makes a real difference for patients. And here is one example working with our partner GlaxoSmithKline. The idea here is that we will find areas that are of mutual interest to our scientists and to pharma, a particular disease, for example, or a particular molecular pathway. And we can then work together to make sure that we can, as efficiently as possible, go from the discovery process through to experimental medicine protocols in the clinical research facility, having validated the discoveries, for example, in cells and tissues from patients with a particular disease. And the Papworth Tissue Bank is very important in this regard. Ultimately, it requires working with pharma to be able to deliver on these sorts of things to maximize the impact of the discoveries. And of course, being a neighbour of AstraZeneca's R&D hub, we will be working closely with them as well, particularly around heart failure and chronic lung disease. And one example is that chronic lung diseases such as lung fibrosis and COPD seem to be caused by accelerated lung aging, and we would like to find ways of slowing or preventing that lung aging, or indeed using regenerative medicine approaches to look whether it's possible to grow lung from stem cells, which could then be used for transplantation, which would have been science fiction a few years ago, but is now the sorts of things that we can do together. So the Heart and Lung Research Institute will be a global institute with global ambitions. So although we're located on the Biomedical campus, we have strategic interactions with other local partners across the Biomedical campus, as indicated on the left here, and then moving left to right, we can see more partners further afield, such as the Sanger Institute, European Bioinformatics Institute down at Hingston, and working nationally with other universities. We need to all be working on this together, and we hope to pull in and encourage collaboration between ourselves and other universities and organisations across the UK to achieve our ambitions, as well as strategic partnerships with universities across the world. So here is a drone image of the build. You can see it's gone up extremely rapidly over the last few months. We only started building in January. The west wing are now working on the roof, and the east wing is rapidly catching up. The contractors have done, we're absolutely delighted with them that they've continued throughout the pandemic to be able to build this building by implementing safe working practices and reducing the density of workers on the site by doubling the shifts and that sort of thing. A lot of work's been going on very quickly, and so far we've had no complaints from our neighbours at Royal Papworth Hospital. This is an image again taken just last week of the outside of the building. You can see the 3 stories here on this west wing, and the cladding will be going on it very soon. Here's an image taken from the inside, looking out towards other buildings on the campus. And again, here you can see on the right, the roof is now under construction on the west. So I'm going to stop there, and just to summarise what this institute is about. It's a world-leading interdisciplinary institute for cardiovascular and respiratory sciences. This should transform through integration and synergies with local experts and local centres of excellence to lead to a step change in our research potential, provide outstanding training opportunities, enhance translational momentum of getting science into patients, and the building will be completed in December 2021. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was a fantastic presentation and great to learn a little bit more. For everyone who's watching, and thank you for joining us, Nick is in the top left corner of my screen, and Ian Smith is also joining us for a quick question and answer session before we go into Dr. Ian Smith's presentation. So there's currently just one question, so please feel free to add some more questions to the Q&A just below. But the question that's come up is, do you think that COVID-19 pandemic will change the way to use space going forward compared to the way that the building's already been designed? I was looking at some of the images that you saw there, and obviously the way that people are sitting together in the desk space is likely to change, I would assume.
That's right. Yeah, no, that is a good question. And of course, this building was originally conceived before all this started, but we have been thinking hard about how we adapt the space to cope with, at least, you know, in the medium term, the response to COVID. Clearly, if you look at some of those diagrams I showed you, the density of seating is quite high, and it's likely that we will be including, for example, partitions between desk spaces, and the advice about people only coming into work when they absolutely have to may well still be in place when we open, so that the actual density within the building could be a lot lower. Obviously, if you're working in a laboratory, doing experiments with cells, you sort of have to be there, but if you're analysing data, for example, you could be on a computer at home or somewhere else. So yeah, this is going to have to be factored in to how the building operates. Hopefully one day this will be a thing of the past and we will be back to normal service.
Indeed, thanks, Nick. Ian, in terms of kind of in the clinical environment, because obviously you're working in the hospital all the time, how has COVID kind of affected how you have been treating people?
So I think we've been very lucky. It's one of the advantages of the new hospital that nearly all of the patient accommodation is single room. And so the up ramp of admissions has been really dramatic. We've been able to get back pretty much, I mean, some areas of the hospital are actually performing more. Cardiology is seeing more patients, catching up on the backlog, more patients than we were before we shut down. So that's really impressive, and it talks to the strength of the design of the hospital. In the office areas, the areas that would look a bit like the HLRI, there have been a lot of adaptations. All the desks have been moved around. The screens, now that Perspex is available again, the screens have gone up, and people have just learnt a different way of working. And I think the lack of infections amongst the staff are testament that people learned very quickly and were very sensible. And there are a proportion of people who do spend a proportion of the week out of the hospital, and that suits some of them very well. And I think getting the right mix, it would be second nature to us by the time the HLRI opens.
That's great news, thank you. And I had another question that's just come in saying, what do you think your biggest challenge is going to be to moving into the building? There's a number of ways of looking at that, from kind of the researchers who are coming in from the different areas to how the hospital will engage. So I'll let you both answer whichever way you feel appropriate.
Yeah, there are some huge challenges, and I think there are several different ones. But of course, the building will be complete in something like October 2021. And then there will be a period of people moving into the building, which won't be complete until the end of spring 2022. So, you know, it'd be everything all at the same time, which would be extremely challenging. For me, at the moment, the biggest challenge is that this is a very diverse building. The people in it come from very different backgrounds. As I mentioned in my presentation, data scientists, clinicians, Papworth's Research and Development Team, people with different types of experiments that they're doing, and making sure that everybody is happy when they arrive in that building and the environment that they need to do those experiments is right for them is quite a challenge. And it's something we're working very hard on at the moment.
Ian, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think from our perspective, a lot of the groups that are coming in are already up and running, and the big added value is having new neighbours to share knowledge with and interact with. The CRF is pretty much, will be starting from ground zero. And so one of the things that we're very keen to do is to get as much running in shadow form in the hospital if needs be, but wherever we can, so that we aren't starting from cold, that we're actually taking a run up to it. And so we're very keen to find partners to start to build our portfolio of studies before the CRF opens.
Does that mean there'll be almost a recruitment drive for people to come and join the institute, or are you drawing people from existing institutions?
It's a bit of both. So one of the problems that we faced over the past few years is that, for example, people who work in heart disease and lung disease are very spread out across the campus, or indeed in the central university. So some of this is bringing people together so that we can collaborate more effectively with each other. But it's not just about that. We have something like 25% of space within the Institute for new recruitments. And so, yeah, a recruitment drive will be underway. We want to attract people, the best people from around the world, to come and work in this institute.
Great, thank you, Nick. And just as a kind of an additional point of it, where did the funding come from in order to build this? What is sure to be an amazing building, joining the many that look fantastic on the campus?
Yeah, so no, it's something I didn't mention in my presentation, and this is something like a £67 million project to build and fit out this new institute. And the funding has come so far from the British Heart Foundation. They gave £10 million about 3 years ago. They were the first people to really sort of invest in this concept. And on the back of that, the university put in 5 million, and Papworth Charity also 5 million. And then finally, last year, we received a major award from the UK government of £30 million. And that together was enough to initiate the building and getting a contractor on board. So there's still a little bit of a shortfall, and we're very hopeful that a donor will step forward to fill the gap that's left.
Lovely,
thank you. Building.
That's fine, thank you. Well, another question's just come in, but I'm just conscious of the amount of time and we need to fit Ian's presentation in as well. So the anonymous attendee who's just asked another question about COVID-19 will come back to you in the Q&A that we'll do just after Ian's presentation. So if that's okay with anyone. Bear in mind also, if you have any questions or any thoughts that have come up from watching Nick, and then you think about them during Ian's presentation, please feel free to add them into the Q&A. That would be fantastic, thank you. So with no further ado, I think we can just hand over to Ian's presentation now.
Hey, hi, this is Ian Smith. I'm the Director of Research at Papworth Hospital. I'm very pleased to be talking to you today, and thanks to Jill for the invitation and to Nick for his great talk. Hopefully this is going to be a complementary talk where I'll discuss where we are with Papworth Hospital and how that interacts with the HLRI. So we'll just see how I cope with the tech. You'll see that I've had a bit of help from a junior member of the team, Henry, and it'll keep trying to tell you that he's giving this lecture, but don't believe it, believe your eyes. Okay, so welcome again. What's the view of the HLRI from Papworth, and how is Royal Papworth, how are we faring, and how are we going to contribute to this partnership and enormous potential? Let's get rid of me. There's Henry. Okay, so I'd like to start with a question of how long does it take to get from Papworth to Cambridge and why that might matter. So according to Google, it's about 21 minutes, which doesn't sound too bad. The problem is that that's too far to have accidental meetings with our academic partners and vice versa. That's too far for them to have accidental meetings with us, or even to have planned meetings where we can generate ideas, work on projects together. And it's been a major handicap to research, certainly at Papworth, over the last many years, where we could have been developing ideas collaboratively with our colleagues in the university and at the medical school. And that was one of the major drivers for moving the hospital into Cambridge. And another answer to the question of how long does it take to get to Papworth, from Papworth to Cambridge, is more than 30 years. And that would be maybe the answer that John Warwick would give you if I asked him that question. And there were a lot of messages like this on the way, a lot of things to get through, but there was determination, and it's certainly been worth all of the effort. So how long does it take now to get from Papworth to our academic colleagues and collaborators? And the answer is about 30 seconds. And that's just an enormous difference. And it's no coincidence. There's been a lot of thought, obviously, about how this would work. So here is the hospital, which we'll be talking about how things are going there in the clinical services. And here's the HLRI. And the closest point of contact between the two is the canteen. And that isn't an accident, that we want to be able to interact in an environment that's conducive to coming up with new ideas, to accidental meetings, to generating that coffee room atmosphere that means that we can really work together in the best possible way. So we've had a very busy 18 months as the hospital. First of all, there was the move. We had the official opening, visit of the Queen, and we were just getting into our stride clinically when COVID hit, and everything was changed around to cope with that. And I think we can be justifiably proud of how well we did as a hospital and how much of a contribution we made to the region with outstanding survival figures. And now we're back to opening up our services and back to getting back on track. And certainly my focus and the focus of an awful lot of our research teams is going to be on this, on the HLRI. But if we look at how the hospital is doing, I think it's worth just revisiting some of the highlights of our clinical services. We start with cardiac surgery. And this is David Jenkins is the head of the service. And in recent results, I've shown that cardiac surgery, cardiothoracic surgery in Papworth Hospital is UK leading, has the lowest death rate. And I think if you look at these two figures for survival, they look rather similar, don't they? 98.8 and 98.2 in effect. But that means that the death rate in other hospitals is 50% higher. And so that's a huge difference and a huge testament to the quality of the work being done at Papworth. And partly for that reason, but inversely, as a consequence of doing a very large number of cases, we get excellent outcomes, and we do the most cases in the UK as well. It's a similar story for transplantation. Transplant surgery has excellent survival rates, and that's in the short term and in the longer term, and that applies to both heart transplants and lung transplants. Just picking services where we've got up-to-date outcomes. The oncology service, the patient experience is superb. I could have given lots of other examples, and I don't want to pick winners, but well, here's another one. The thoracic surgery for lung cancer, the best survival in the UK. So excellent outcomes all round. And as I'm sure many of you will know, Papworth Hospital had its CQC inspection and was the first hospital in the UK to get outstanding in all 5 of the categories that are judged. And one of the things that the team picked out in the report was the collaboration with engineers, academics and clinicians across the biomedical campus. And that was clearly already apparent, even though we've been on the site just a few months. As a follow-up to that, this is from the Care Quality Commission, patient survey published in July, and they surveyed 70,000 patients across the UK, 731 from Patworth, and it was a simple question of whether or not the patients had been approached about research and whether they had been invited to take part, and we were in the top 6 hospitals in the country for, sorry, the top 6% of hospitals in the country for approaching our patients about research. If we look at other measures of our current research output, things are going pretty well. If we look at full papers published in a year, this is simply looking at Papworth affiliated publications on PubMed. There's been year-on-year growth. And we're well on target this year to beat last year's target. And I think that we'll see a further ramp up when the HLRI is fully functional. I would expect this to be 2 or 3 times higher within the first couple of years. If we look at how many studies we're actually running at the moment, we're getting close to 200. And I think this is what Vicky Hughes is, the senior manager in R&D, and this is what she would call a well-balanced portfolio. I think I'd agree with her that we have a number of non-commercial studies. We have a good proportion of commercial studies. We have no problems working with commercial partners and providing them with a great service, I hope. And then there's a good chunk of Papworth sponsored studies. So these are our own researchers coming up with novel ideas to pursue and finding their own ways of funding them. And this is, again, I would anticipate a metric that's going to take off as we move to the HLRI and the capacity that, in particular for us, the clinical research facility is going to provide. If we look at the infrastructure that we've got, we have been working hard to get in the best shape for the collaboration with the HLRI and the university. We have an HTA licensed tissue bank, which gives us access to or the ability to bank widely from our rare cohorts of patients. We have, in the last 5 years, established a clinical trials unit based in Papworth, and that's a collaboration with the MRC Biostatistics unit in Cambridge and the Health Economics unit in Brunel University. And so we can offer project management, grant writing, data management, statistics and health economics, the whole package required to manage major projects and clinical trials. We have an R&D. In R&D, we have a bank of research nurses and clinical trial coordinators who are very experienced and professional and help us to deliver great outcomes. And increasingly our electronic patient record is being honed and improved so that it's increasingly research supportive and researcher friendly. I'll just give you an individual example of that. So before the EPR was available, this work would have probably taken years, but it was completed in a matter of weeks. This is a project that I've been involved with European partners, the Track and Know project, which was just looking at the mobility of patients coming to Papworth and to our services in the sleep centre. And this graph has details of 25,000 patients, their journeys over a couple of years to our centre, where they were more likely to attend, where they were more likely to fail to attend. We looked at all sorts of factors that might affect their attendance rate, and distance didn't seem to be an issue. But when we drilled down into multiple indices of deprivation, we found that that was a factor. And so that allows us to look into the future of how we might balance our, where we put our outreach services to best serve the people who need our services most. And that is just indicative of what we can achieve now that we can get so much access to so much data, and that's going to be a great strength and a great tool going forward to our collaboration with the HLRI. It's difficult to avoid lists in a talk like this. I want to give a shout out to everybody and all the great work they're doing. This is just a very brief overview of the clinical teams that are involved in research and will be making the most of the new collaborations available. In interventional cardiology, we've got a great team there with Andrew Grace just having been appointed as an honorary professor. Working with him, we've got Claire Martin, who trained with him, and these images are some from her work looking at re-entry arrhythmias in the ventricle. And in that team, we've also got Greg Meller, so a very strong triumvirate there working on new research ideas. That's in the electrophysiology. In interventional cardiology, leading up the efforts there, we've got Steve Hall, who has a very active project profile, and he's working both on the left heart and on the right side of the heart as he leads the balloon pulmonary angioplasty project, and that's a UK, it's the only service in the UK. In surgery, we've already seen David Jenkins and his team, but other people there. Sam Nashef is working on outcomes in cardiac surgery, particularly in elderly and vulnerable people, trying to see whether we're doing great things in terms of survival, but was it the right thing to do the operation in the first place, which I think is such a basic question. In the surgical team, we've got Simon Messer and Steve Large, and I'll come on to some of their work later. In anaesthetics, we've got a lot of work going on in techniques of how to best prepare patients, looking at anemia, which is being led by Andy Klein, who also has an honorary chair elsewhere. And in addition to pre-op assessments, he's looking at post-op care with a major international study of high-flow oxygen. In critical care and ECMO, Alain Wojtek has done fantastic work over the COVID period, along with that team, and there'll be a lot of publications coming out of that. Again, the ECMO is a national service, and Alain's an international and nationally recognized expert in that area. In chronic lung infection and cystic fibrosis, we have Professor Floto, Andreas Floto, and Charlie Howarth, who are doing great work both at the basic level with Andreas, and he's going to be firmly ensconced in the HLRI, but also in the hospital and in the community with patients with cystic fibrosis. In immunology, we've got Helen Baxendale, who is heading up our efforts in response to COVID and the immunological profiling of staff and patients, and she just won a £1 million grant to pursue that work, which is very exciting. Pulmonary vascular disease is Nick's area, and his input obviously has been crucial over the years. We've also got Joe Pepke there, and Mark Toshner, who is appointed through the university and is doing fantastic work leading up national efforts in translational work, but is also heading up the vascular follow-up study in COVID, which will be coming out of Patworth and the university. In oncology, we've got Robert Rintoul, who's a reader and leads on a number of projects. And in sleep and ventilation, along with myself, Tim Quinnell has just got a big grant to look into CPAP and mandibular advancement devices. Interstitial lung disease, we have Helen Parfrey, who's working on a very large number of clinical trials. And Thilai, who I'll come on to some of his work, as just an example of collaboration. And in radiology, we've made a new appointment, Jonathan McCall in the university. And so lots of promise there, again, looking at COVID follow-up as one of his first major projects. Okay, so I just wanted to focus, it's, with so many to choose from, it's difficult to pick anything that stands out, but I think this is a standout of collaboration and the way forward and how we can react and respond nimbly when we have access to so many experts. And so this is a collaboration between Mahanthan, who's just disappeared under Henry's name there. Okay, so Tom McLennan is the fellow, and Mahanthan is leading this group. But in there we've got radiologists and mathematicians, and we've also got SMEs involved. And this is machine learning, looking at CT scans in people with pulmonary fibrosis. And pulmonary fibrosis, most of the attention has been based on the lung tissue and not on the airways, which seems logical because that's where the disease is based. But because the lung tissue shrinks, that changes the caliber of the airways. And this is the new insight that this group are working on. They've been looking at CT scans over an interval. And this is an image that comes from that work of 2 CT scans done at different times and looking at what happens to the caliber of the airways. And you can see from this color coding, the more red you get, the bigger the airways are, so the more they're being stretched because the lung tissue around them is shrinking. And this clearly shows progression. And in a small series now, the group have shown that patients who are clinically stable, you don't see this phenomenon. The airways don't change in size. If we look at this, this is looking at the different bits of the airway. So let's just go back to that. And if you compare that to a group who are deteriorating clinically, then there is progression. Here you can see that the airway volume's going up. And that's a new way of looking at these patients. There are a group of patients where it's quite difficult to see who's getting worse and who isn't. And if this picks up things earlier, that will be great. And it's likely to be a much better outcome for drug trials, showing earlier changes. And so that's a great bit of collaboration and showing how nimble, when you've got these people working with all of this enthusiasm. This is work that was done this year on patients with COVID and looking at, excuse me, comparing the images of patients with COVID, and this is an international collaboration looking at people with ARDS due to lung damage from other infections. And you can see that the pictures are quite different. And this is looking at the caliber of the blood vessels and the amount of blood in the small and large vessels. And the blue are the large vessels. And we can see here in the COVID patient on the left that there's a lot more blue, that the distribution of blood is quite different. And we can look at that across a series of patients and compare healthy controls to people with acute lung injury for other reasons. And they're all sitting up here with the distribution of blood in one characteristic distribution, and the outlier is COVID, which looks quite different. And so that informs us that it is a unique disease and reinforces lots of messages coming from other areas. But I think this is, again, it's an example of the potential for collaboration when we have the university, we have experts in machine learning, in computing and radiology and imaging and lung disease all in one place. And that's the exciting prospect for the future. And similarly, we have the work, as I said, of the team working on, this is Steve Large and Simon Messer, who are looking at transplantation and maintaining organs, and in opening up transplantation to organs donated after cardiac death rather than brain death. And this has allowed us to increase transplantation by 40%, which is just a huge impact. But because some of those hearts are not usable, it gives us the opportunity then to look at what can we do to increase heart function in human hearts outside the body. And that's, again, a huge opportunity for development. This is the rig that they're using at the moment, but they're working on a new rig, which is going to be much more accessible. And their first project looking at novel compounds to improve the function of the heart will be starting shortly. So just in summary, I'd like to say that the hospital is investing in researchers, it's investing in support staff and infrastructure. We're very much open to collaboration, and we're raring to go for this excitement, the exciting new development in the history of the hospital. So thank you very much.
Lovely, great. Thank you very much, Ian. That was incredibly interesting and useful to understand what's going to be happening as we go forward. So we've had a couple of questions come in from the audience. So the first one was, this was just before Ian's presentation started. Do you think working from home during COVID-19 pandemic, it makes it possible for people all over the world to be able to work for the same organisation? So the recruitment might not write with the specific look. I think it might mean, can we utilise the skills from across the whole of the world working in the in an institute?
Yeah, I think it's also implying that you could work for two different organisations at the same time in that way, which actually isn't that unusual within the university. So people can work, half-time in one university and have an affiliation with another institute as well. We often do that in academia. So it's not a bad suggestion. Yeah, somebody, especially it depends on the sort of science that they were doing, of course. And again, if you're a data scientist, you may not need to be physically present as much as somebody doing experiments with cells. So yeah, possibly, although it will be interesting to see, won't it? I mean, this is a phenomenon that will affect many walks of life, and whether that is something that will emerge from this, I think we'll have to wait and see.
No, that's a fair point. Some of the other questions that have come through separately on the chat rather than the Q&A. One person said, have you set yourself any particular targets for what the HLRI will do? Whether that's kind of a target for what you want to achieve in 10 years, or is there any one particular area you want to see that it makes a difference in?
Yes, we did set some targets actually, and it may sound a little ambitious, but we would, the target that we set ourselves is that we'd like to have at least proof of concept for 10 new diagnostic approaches or treatments or devices within the first 5 years of the institute opening. Now that sounds fairly sort of trite soundbite, if you like, but actually I think it is useful to focus on those sort of impacts, because impacts are important. This building is actually about making a difference. So I think if we set ourselves that sort of challenge, that means we have to focus on it from day one. So that was a target that we set ourselves.
Ian, anything that you wanted to, any target that you've set for it?
Well, I think they're our targets.
Yeah.
Nick and I have been working together on this for years, and I absolutely agree. I think that is, it's a nice round number, isn't it? We're going to get,
yes.
But of course we're not. We're going to get more than 10.
At least, I think it said at least, yes.
So it won't be a nice round number, but it will be meaningful progress, and I think that that's very achievable, and absolutely with this massive investment, all the goodwill, all the people rooting for it, I'm absolutely sure that we'll achieve those things.
Great. And one of the other questions that's come through on the Q&A is, the HLRI has some ingredients that make it unique. Is there one standout factor that you hope will make it a success?
Yeah, I would say two, but okay, if you're going to push me to one, I might say another one. But I think the big one is literally this proximity to Royal Papworth Hospital. I think that is unique, that you've got a clinically excellent NHS trust, 400-bedded hospital with some of the best outcomes in the country, right next to an institute dedicated to heart and lung disease, with the interaction between the clinicians and the scientists in that way. I don't think there's anything quite like that, or maybe one or two in Europe. If I am able to quickly say another, it would be right from the beginning our willingness and appreciation that we need to work with industry to make some of these things a reality. And I don't mean just doing a trial for a pharma company. I mean embedding deep interest from investigators right at the very beginning of the discovery aspects of the work, taking it through that validation and then into experimental medicine, and having that relationship all along the way, so everybody is invested intellectually into it.
Yeah, and I'd absolutely agree. And I think it's interesting that the way we're working has changed, and a number of the questions have been about, well, how are we going to change how we work now? It's COVID, and maybe actually we don't need any staff. We can do everything like this. I'm really enjoying this meeting, but I know that I'd be enjoying it a lot more if we were all in the room together. And I think the presentation would have a different feel. We would be getting bouncing questions, getting a much better interaction. And this is great. This is the best we can do, but it isn't the same. And the fact that we're going to be on the campus, we've got the hospital next to the research institute, next to some fantastic pharma capacity, next to Addenbrooke's and all of the expertise of other specialists and other bits of the university. It's that proximity is what this is all about. And I think that's what really is going to make the whole thing work so brilliantly.
In terms of kind of what's happening across the UK at the moment, the government has have a great push towards levelling up and trying to help those areas which don't have the kind of the apparent success of Cambridge. How do you think buildings such as the HLRI will help that kind of process?
Yeah, so it's as I was mentioning in my talk, we're an outward-looking institute, and we are looking to make a difference where it can be most felt. That may be nationally or it may be across the world. And by across the world, I mean we have a major program in global health and global cardiovascular disease with collaborations with investigators in Bangladesh and many other countries around the world. So this isn't just about making things better for Cambridge or the Southeast. This is about having a national and global reach.
Great, thank you. And one of the other questions that's come through in the chat is that, is there a kind of a pathway through for a patient? So say someone turns up, or is taken to Royal Papworth or is referred there, do they get treated in the HLRI, or because there are some beds in there, aren't there? How would you end up going into the HLRI if you were a patient, or is it simply there for research and education?
Yeah, Ian, do you want to?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say simply for research and education.
Sorry, yeah.
But no, it's just a turn of phrase. But that's the most complex bit. But no, the patients will come into Papworth and potentially specimens, blood samples, bits of tissue, other things, the data, imaging will all be, with their consent, will all be available to the HLRI. When they're acutely unwell, they'll be in Papworth, and patients won't be treated outside of a trial in the HLRI. Some people will, in a recovery phase from an illness, they'll be going to the HLRI for their follow-up, where we're doing investigations and looking at changes over time once they're over the acute illness. And I'm very confident that part of our COVID strategy will be looking at how we improve the outcome in the longer term when people are over the acute illness, and those patients will be attending the HLRI. They won't be treated with conventional treatment there. They may be treated with novel approaches as part of a trial. So the clinical unit will be to the same standard as the hospital. That's one of the key parts of the development, that it will be all of the monitoring, all of the clinical safety aspects will be absolutely at the same level as if you're in the hospital. But no, we won't be primarily treating people off the street in the HLRI. Sorry, Nick, I don't know if that was, if you had
No, exactly right. I think the way I look at it is that they might be packed with patients when they're in the clinical research facility, the HLRI, but they'll be there as research volunteers, not primarily as patients.
Okay. When you kind of hope that the building will be ready and open from spring 2022, do you plan that everything will be open straight away, or will it be a slow process of kind of starting in 2 or 3 specific areas, or are you wanting to kind of have everything up and running straight away?
Yeah, no, there'll be a cutover period where we do the easy stuff first and the difficult, or the other way around, do the difficult stuff first and then the easy stuff last. And somewhere like the clinical, some completely novel bits of the building, which like the clinical research facility, for example, will have to ramp up in its function, after the building opens, because that is a part of the building we actually have to develop pretty much from scratch, for example.
Also, someone's just texted in, say, if we're in a situation where COVID is still, the work that's ongoing at the moment to develop treatments and vaccines, hasn't found what we need to move forward as a society. Will the HLRI be able to be involved in those sorts of processes, or will it kind of might its function change to being solely focused on trying to find something for COVID, or is that not what it's there for?
It's there for many things, but COVID has certainly sharpened our focus in that area. And for example, the clinical research facility could be used for investigating new vaccines and so on in volunteers and patients. But the focus of the expertise within the HLRI will not be on developing new vaccines, for example. That's a very different skill set which we have in other institutes within Cambridge on the biomedical campus. But our real focus, for example, will be on the fact that when patients die from COVID-19, usually they're dying from the lung injury that ensues from the virus attacking cells within the lung. And that's the process we will focus on, bringing our expertise to bear on how that happens, and can we develop new treatments that can either prevent or reverse the viral lung injury. That will be the specific area, for example, that we will focus on. But also, as we now know, COVID affects many different parts of the body, can affect the heart, the blood vessels, and our cardiovascular scientists could be pivoted to focus on those kind of problems too.
I guess the question that kind of follows up from that is that no one could have ever foreseen that COVID-19 would have the impact that it has. So how do you future-proof research institutes, or can you future-proof them to kind of be able to be nimble enough and flexible enough to change demanding and to meet the demands?
That's a tough one, because in general, historically, when academics are doing research, they've usually got a grant to work on a particular problem, and they've got the expertise to do that. But I think at these times of crisis, and it has happened across the biomedical campus in existing institutes, particularly the Cambridge Institute for Inflammation, Immunology and Infection, that institute pretty much did pivot and put all its resources to work on the immunology of COVID. And I think that was a great example of how these things can be nimble. It does mean that people are redeployed into this sort of research, and we have to rely on our funders to be generous, that at times of national crisis we can use funding to work on something that is of major importance to everybody. I think now we've been through this process, or some of us have been through that process, we do need to build that into future challenge. What would we do if something like this happened again, and what would this institute do? Is something we should have a plan for.
Ian, something?
Yeah, well, I think you were saying that nobody could have predicted this. There have been people predicting it, and the prediction is the next one potentially could be a lot worse. That COVID's been terrible, but if COVID was more infective, compared to some viruses, its R number is relatively low. So I think there does need to be that preparedness, and we need to have that flexibility. But we also need to remember that in this country this year, a lot more people will die of a heart attack than have died of COVID. And whilst it's been life-changing for all of us, our focus shouldn't switch completely, because there are some very, very important questions to answer with our current expertise, without moving completely into a different territory.
Great, thank you, Ian. Well, I've got no more questions that have appeared, and I haven't had any that have been texted in. So I'd just like to thank you both for your time. It's been really interesting. I hope everybody who's been tuned in has enjoyed it and found it incredibly useful. Just a quick thank you obviously to you, Nick, and to Ian, but also to Jill Wilson, who's been pressing the buttons in the background. And when a screen froze for a second, I did panic, but Jill sorted it all out, so that was great. So thank you very much again for everything. And Jill's appeared, there you are. So thank you all again. We will hope to be having more of these virtual events running through until we can start to get back to our natural habitat, which is back into the bars of Cambridge. To be able to see you all, as Ian said, is some of the best ways of actually sharing information, talking and collaborating, and that's what Cambridge is great for. So thank you all again. This video, or this recording, will be available in the next couple of days via our social media channels and the website, so you'll be able to share it again. So thanks ever so much. Have a lovely evening and take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.